Welcome to the Sports Innovation Podcast, presented by the IU Indianapolis Sports Innovation Institute, located in beautiful downtown Indy. I'm your host, Dr. Jeff Sherman, a full-time faculty member within the Sport Management program here at IU Indianapolis, and a professional sports statistician throughout the city. The Sports Innovation Podcast is designed to highlight innovative practitioners and scholars throughout sport and education to learn new and thought-provoking ways to improve our industry together. Thank you for listening to the Sports Innovation Podcast.
All right, so this is David Pierce here on the Sports Innovation Podcast. I'm joined today by Bryan Kryder, and we're going to talk a little bit today about how to do capstones really well as a high-impact practice in higher ed, and hopefully get some more people in sport management excited about doing high-quality capstones, and also kind of maybe walk some new faculty through, what to think about as you're kind of starting out using high-impact practices and capstones in particular. So, Bryan, as you've co-taught with me now for 8 years in this class, so why don't you just give us a little bit of your background and how you ended up kind of co-teaching with us here in the sport management program.
Yeah, so I was a student at IU Indy, and I was in the Kelley School of Business, and so I got out of there and went to professional life, and I was in the sports management straight out of school with a racing team, and that career kind of led me around the world, and I always wanted to give back to IU Indy students. And so probably about 10 years ago, I came and we did some different guest lecturing with Jay Gladden and yourself. And then we really kind of got into maybe a more kind of defined role with me co-teaching and really being that industry knowledge along with the, the textbook or the kind of the, traditional learning model. And so really have gone on this journey of evolving what the capstone is together. And it's been really exciting and really meaningful for me.
So we probably need to talk about what is a capstone, right? So kind of a fancy term. So it's one of 11 high-impact practices that is out there in the higher ed space. Is that active and engaged learning strategy. The kind of the big things about capstones. It's a culminating signature experience. So it should come towards the end of the curriculum. We teach it either in the the last semester or the next to last semester, and it's an experience that requires students to kind of integrate their knowledge from previous coursework in a way that kind of approximates something that they would do in the real world after that. So there are a variety of different ways to play that out. Some programs do it as an internship, but in the sport management program at IU Indianapolis, and the way we'll talk about it today. We do it as project-based learning with a community partner. So students solving, real-world challenges and problems, and then communicating their findings and their innovative ideas to the partner at the end of the class. So I worked with a Capstone Community of Practice group for like a year and a half, and in 2019 we published a Capstone taxonomy, and so we really kind of found 5 things that really define the capstone experience. So number one is that you integrate knowledge. And that can be anywhere from the college experience, but it shouldn't be a class that just stands on its own as this really unique thing that's totally different from everything else. So that does require you to communicate and work a little bit with other faculty members, and how do we scaffold and tie and connect experiences together. Number 2 is there should be a significant investment of time. So, in our class, we work on the same, challenge for all 16 weeks of the semester. Number 3 is there should be reflection on your personal growth, and so we do that at a couple of points in time. Probably could always be doing the reflection piece better, but there should be reflection on the student's own personal growth. Number 4 is that there should be some sort of a tangible product. Now, what that looks like is going to vary by disciplinary field. What we found in sport management is that a pitch, really the pitch presentation. And sometimes it is research findings, but usually it's a pitch idea. And sometimes in that pitch, students do go to the level of creating a model, or they get into a design program or a CAD program, and they actually have some sort of a low fidelity prototype that we in a perfect world can get students to, but certainly the pitch. And then the final thing is that there is a public display or a public demonstration, which really all that means is that that presentation or that tangible product gets outside the classroom. So it doesn't just go to the faculty member grading it. You've got people from the public that can interact and view that in some way. So usually in our class, that's going to be, industry partners, that we're working with. They come and watch the presentation. We've done poster sessions before. Students put them in their e-portfolio. They post on LinkedIn about it. So, there's a wide variety of things that can happen with a project. But that's kind of the boundaries, I guess, of kind of the core required elements of a capstone class.
I think some areas that we've really started to really make it tangible for the students to understand. One is that this a lot of this stuff will feel new, but you should be pulling on knowledge you've learned along the way. So we try to avoid a lot of terms and memorization things. It's really about practice and using the stuff. And so there's a lot of times when we're referring back to the sales class is something we always talk about, like what did you learn in sales class, what did you learn in some other courses. And I think that that's really important because you think about when you get out into the real world, you learn these things, but not necessarily are you going to apply them every day. So you have to be able to pull these tools out of your toolkit whenever they're needed. And so I think that's a great practice for them. I think the other thing too that students aren't prepared for is that there's a lot of the work that needs to be done in between class, right? And regardless if you're a great student and this stuff has come easy to you up until this point, you're going to have to put in work. And the ultimate kind of comparison to sport is you don't get good playing the game, you get good at practice, and then a lot of the great players practice out even more than they practice. And so there needs to be this element of ownership of really taking your pride in your work and moving it beyond just the superficial understanding of the material. It's like, how do I actually apply it? How do I continue to get better in it? So I think that those are some areas. And then two, I think the tangible outcomes, we've been really flexible with that because certain community partners require different things, or the situation or the students. And so I think not having that every semester, the one key development or the key deliverable is really, again, it models the real world, that there's not always going to be a presentation. Maybe there's going to need to be something else that is printed out, or maybe it's more of a written document. So I think being able to show that the students that there's multiple ways to have outputs and have deliverables is really modeling of how the industry is going to look for to see people's work.
Yeah, so in some disciplines, it could certainly be submitting a paper for review as a publication in a peer-reviewed journal. That could be kind of the public demonstration of the work. We've also done things with kind of live stream and broadcasted type things is another way to get it out to a broader audience. Getting students to blog or do. We put that on the Sports Innovation Institute blog, but that also connects very easily to their LinkedIn. And then it becomes kind of their personal storytelling tool as well, not just for our class presenting to the partner, but then they've got kind of a tangible way to talk about it. And we've really worked with students over the years on like, how do you talk about this experience? Because if it just stays bottled up in the classroom and in the Canvas gradebook, you're not really getting the most out of it. We've certainly seen success with students who've been able to translate that.
And I think there's a sense of pride, right? We've seen students over 16 weeks. Usually that last, 4 weeks when people realize that the end is near. And so you see that sense of pride is that when they show up to do a poster presentation or just a regular presentation, it's usually the first time we've seen everyone dressed up, and they just come to those meetings with a different mentality. And, something that we've always told them is that this isn't just a 16-week project that you go put in the shelf when you're done. Like you should be able to talk about this in your first interviews or interviews for your internships, or down the road if you had a great experience with a certain organization. Like, what are those key learnings that 2, 3, 5 years down the road you can explain how how that output really was more than just the grade. And I think that's something that you can see it with students grow in that they now see that they actually have something tangible to go out and share. Even, I'm sure there's a sense of pride with their other students or their families to say like, hey, we actually created this. And, sometimes in sports management, you don't have those tangible outcomes out, of a test or whatever, and you can actually show people. It's a great tool on LinkedIn too to really kind of further their, knowledge.
So we'll link a model in the show notes that we created for the project-based learning taxonomy that we did a couple years ago that kind of walks you through about 20 different options or ways that you can think about getting students to publicly display their work. So let's talk a little bit about the blocking and tackling and the structure of the class that we teach. So a typical semester, 25, 28 students, somewhere in there. So we're doing groups of 3 or 4. So we've got 5 or 6 groups of 3 or 4. Maybe there's a group of 5 that sneaks in there every once in a while. So we do kind of the collaborative project-based learning in groups. And then there's a community partner. Typically it's a community partner. We have done like an industry problem space before, but mostly it's a community partner. And I think the breakthrough that we had in the class is when we started using design thinking as the framework for the class. And within that, there's 1,000 different routes you can go. And we're not going to get in the weeds on design thinking and all the methods and mindsets today. But I do think it's important to kind of call out that there is a general template or a framework that kind of keeps us on a cadence and moving through the class. So kind of the first phase of that is what we would call the discovery phase, right? So that is reading secondary research, that's getting students online, maybe reading some strategic plans. And then it's also authentic primary data collection. So design thinking is rooted in empathy. So therefore we're doing observation and we really invest in the interview process. So a typical semester, 40 to 50 interviews collected by those 25 students. Students get 2 or 3 reps on, improving their interview skills, and we're given a lot of feedback during that time. But that's kind of phase 1. Phase 2 we call define. So that is kind of synthesizing all of that data. We've got a lot of tools to do that, from journey maps to empathy maps. We've done so many different things in that, and it's this is where students are really immersing themselves in the data and trying to frame the problem, or sometimes it's see the opportunity, depending on kind of the nature of the project. But ultimately, about halfway through the class, they frame a how might we statement that's kind of their inspiration for the rest of the class. And then we move into an ideation phase, which is brainstorming, usually about 2 weeks there, structured brainstorming process, not just throwing random things up against the wall. And then you really get into that last 5 or 6 weeks, which we call the develop phase or deliver phase, which is maybe trying to get to a low fidelity prototype, but at a minimum, it's putting the pitch presentation together. So those are kind of our 4 steps of the semester. We can do that in a 16-week semester, and I'll let you unpack a couple of these things here. But ultimately, it's an innovation. We do stress it's an innovation class. Like, you would really need a second 16-week class of entrepreneurship to like get more into the weeds of like a business plan and implementation and how do we iterations and how do we really get this to market. But in 16 weeks, you can certainly have a well thought out, innovative solution.
Yeah, and so part of the design thinking process is that understanding, or that phase where it's discovery. But 2 things that I think we've evolved, especially in the last 2 years, is not making it about the individual groups, as if they need to come up with all of the answers around this larger problem space, but kind of thinking of that wisdom of the crowd, where we have all those interviews from the whole class, so students have access to all the interviews, not just the ones they conducted or their group. There's a lot more discussion around some of the kind of key readings and key things that we have, so people are getting a more general understanding, much bigger than if we were just assigning them their little piece. Or we found there was a lot of fragmentation, right? Like groups. Yeah, and groups just couldn't get as much done if they were just, generally kind of scratching the surface. So we had to make that kind of knowledge pool bigger so that we can pull from that later. And really the students can learn how to collectively work as a population, but then also
to the point that we actually in some semesters will delay when we put students in groups.
Yeah.
So that through the data collection phase, we're working as one class together. And we've also used some technology in certain semesters to kind of facilitate that. We used a platform called Notably AI last year on both of our projects, which really helped, with the transcriptions and the saving of the video, the transcribing, the finding themes using AI, organizing and kind of collating the data so that students could enter that kind of platform environment and be able to extract meaningful information, as opposed to like they're not going to sit there and reread 50 interview transcripts.
Yeah, and that was a real challenge because in a traditional design thinking, maybe studio, right, you would have all of this stuff on Post-it notes that could stay up there, and students could come back in, and we were asking students for one class period to get a lot of stuff on the board, and then they'd have to take it somewhere, and typically it
Sticky notes don't go back up the second time, for instance.
It doesn't come back up. So the digital experience really helped us be able to create and house all this information, but it also, I think, still allowed the whole class to have access to quotes or interviews that they didn't even conduct, which I think was really important for them to understand the true meaning of collaboration. And the other thing too is like your work, no one needed to give it a low effort because everyone was better with it when they really brought their best effort. So when they were interviewing, the better the interview that they did helped everyone. And so collectively, it's just a really good practice as students can learn that their good work actually benefits not just them, but maybe their whole group, but then also the whole class.
So one of the quality dimensions that's out there in the high impact practice literature, and we'll unpack a few of these, but it's a good time to talk about this one. One of those quality dimensions in a capstone would be frequent, timely, and constructive feedback. So let's just take this interview phase where 25 new interviews come in. Let's say students are interviewing coaches in Special Olympics on how to improve that experience and recruit more coaches in the future. That was our fall one last year. We would spend an hour like really diving deep into the weeds on one interview, right? And then getting students to try to apply, because the feedback is going to be the same across most students, right? It's the first time they've ever done it. This is a new thing. And so it's a 3-hour class. So we would take about half the class just unpacking one interview with a student who is willing to have their work kind of examined and open, right? And then, just the success then that you see in that second set of interviews when students that have, taken it seriously and taken it to heart come back in that second set of interviews is always just so far superior to the first. But there's other points in time too where, I guess one of the things we talk to students about that's a little bit different about this class is in a lot of classes, you submit your work, it kind of goes away for a week into we call it the Canvas black hole. A grade pops up somewhere. Maybe a faculty member makes a comment, but half the times the students don't even see the comment, and it just kind of goes away. Yeah. Like it's not like really impacting their thinking going forward. And so we have really tried to work out the process so that we're like meeting students like where they are like intellectually with it, but also like at the right point in time so that we don't put ourselves in a spot where they're not hearing back from us for a week. So some of that is like the in club. You want to kind of unpack how
I think the other important thing is that not only do they get the feedback, but then they actually apply it right away. Because I think so often, it's even from a traditional, like you get a grade and they say, well, what you could have done better. There's not an immediate opportunity to improve either the document. One thing that even before we do interviews is like, we have to write the questions. So we spend time even getting feedback on how do we change this question from maybe a closed question, closed-ended to actually an open-ended. And so just even getting that feedback and then quickly be able to change a question gives them, and it's not like that's over a whole week and there's an assignment and then you come back and then you're like, oh, there's a lot more work. We're kind of rolling up our sleeves when we're in class, and then we can get those immediate feedback. We can make adjustments. Where I think different from what we've really tried to do is that from an instructor to a guest speaker to a lecture, from maybe a video, is that the students have to take that information right away and put it, interpret it and put it into action. What we have found is students who are just kind of passively listening to these things, it's not applied the next week, or it's not applied in 6 weeks, whenever they really need it, and then it's gone. And so what we've found is that they have to stay engaged, but we have to really keep this closed feedback loop where we're constantly hearing feedback, but then also they're doing something with it.
And so I'll get really specific for a second. If you're listening to this, trying to visualize what this looks like. So we teach a class that is Friday morning, 9 to noon. And so I will make the due date of the assignment essentially Wednesday at 11:59 p.m., maybe, Thursday at 8 a.m., whatever, so that I have Thursday to go look at the work that the students have done. And then Bryan and I have a often animated, frustrating sounding call on Thursday night about what they submitted, so that we know exactly where they're at. And so on Friday, we can go in, give them the feedback ahead of time, get them working, and then revising. And I don't ever really even go post a score for that first attempt.
Yeah.
Like, it just is kind of, it's gone. And what I really care about is where we can get them to by the end of class on Friday. And so that just requires, from my perspective, like, it's just a different way of teaching. You have to be incredibly flexible. You've got to be, it's the ultimate, like, just-in-time kind of teaching model. And you just have to be okay sometimes being a week behind where you thought you were going to get to, and not just jam that next. In fact, we're to the point, some of this, we've done it so many times. Like, I don't have the next assignment created. Like, we usually create our assignment talking to each other in the last 15 minutes of the class. Now, we're very prepared. Like, we've done this enough. We know what the possibilities are. We're ready for it. But it just doesn't make sense to do an assignment that doesn't meet the mark for the next best thing to move their thinking forward.
And I think, sometimes when it says, meeting a student where they're at, it's kind of seen as, how do we, coddle them or make it work for them. But what we're really doing is saying, like, hey, now that we have a very accurate picture on that Wednesday, Thursday, now we have to meet them where they're at. Because if we have something that we had planned, but they're clearly not getting what we tried to talk to or what we spent time with in class the week before, how good is that really going to be if we jump ahead based on, a timeline that we created? So we've really learned how to adjust on the fly and come in. Again, we try to limit surprises as far as, like, them, and I think even you adjusting it from them turning it in right before class, because that's typically what it was. They turn in class and then we didn't know where they were, to move that back. But I would say too, like, you as a professor, the syllabus used to be, it is what it is. This is the week we need to be. You've really looked at that more as a kind of not even a roadmap, because it has to be more flexible than a roadmap. And that's where I think, to really get the most out of this class, you are meeting, or this type of approach with Capstone is, you have to meet students where they're at, but that does not mean that you're trying to dumb it down or make it easy for them. It just means that we have to be flexible.
So a couple of these other quality dimensions I think you'll see are very related. So another one is that the performance expectations are set at appropriate high levels. And so that manifests itself in a whole bunch of ways. But ultimately, in my mind, the starting point for that is when they're doing interviews and observation, they are getting outside the classroom. They are interacting with real users in a real environment. They interview real youth sport coaches or Special Olympics coaches or sports officials or whatever, topic du jour we've had over the years. They're at a local racetrack, season ticket holder. Yeah. Just the visitors. The whole thing. They are outside the classroom. They're talking with people in the real world. And there's just something about that immediately puts the level of expectation at just on a different plane, as opposed to a simulation or a case study or an assignment. It's just at a different level.
And I think you can start seeing the light bulbs go off that this is different. And that's usually when we start even thinking about the questions, and they see how much time we spend in just crafting the right questions. Like, this is not
and
just
how to ask a follow-up question.
And
role playing.
Yeah,
you hear this, you say that. Yeah.
So I think they understand that this is definitely the expectations from our end. And again, that's trying to make sure that they understand that the harder that they work in these phases, the better the end product's going to be in, 10 weeks down the road. It's just hard for them to see that. So it's really our job to manage that expectation and really set the bar really high for them.
Another dimension is that the interactions with faculty and peers, that they have interactions with faculty and peers about substantive matters. So there's the element of like the group work and synthesizing the data and learning from each other. But I would also say, as an instructor, like you are also having substantive conversation with them, because actually, really, I mean, we know the topic at the beginning of the semester, but we don't even really know what the problems are, let alone the solution. So like in a case study kind of class, like you kind of know what you want students to come up with. And like that was hard the first couple of semesters I taught this, to kind of give up that control and realize like I have to immerse myself in this data as well, or I can't really have those interactions with students. So that is it is alarming the first couple of times you do it, but I think once you get used to it and embrace it, it's actually your researcher hat can come on as a professor or an instructor or as an academic and really help pull students to another level. And then also part of that would be co-instructing with someone from the industry who has a different way of thinking about it and a different lens. Like it's just a really rich, dynamic environment.
And I think part of that, like I think we've done a really good job of either before or after class or kicking off the class of just helping, like open it up with maybe a very broad question, or like, what did you learn last time, or what have you learned between the last time we met? And usually it's just to spark up the conversation and then to kind of see where their heads are. How can we take this conversation? But really, I think what we're trying to teach them is you need to, we get it. You live your life in between classes, but now that you're here in class, we really need to get your head back into it. And just like we do, we have, other things on our schedule, we need to get our heads back into it. So sometimes the way that we do that too is just hearing what the students, like, what did they learn? A lot of times we're not in these interviews per se.
Yeah.
So we need to hear like what they're hearing, or, the feedback from there is like, hey, this type of question I really didn't ask very well because it didn't, because when you write stuff and it sounds like great in the script, but then when it's read out, it doesn't, it falls short. So that's the things that we like to hear back. And I think we always can tell the classes that really embrace that kind of dialogue about kind of the subject, at least to kick off classes. Or the great thing is after class, it's 2 hours and 45 minutes, you're kind of brain dead. Everyone's brain dead.
Exhausted. Mentally exhausted.
And then the student will come up and say, will say something to you, and you're just like, they really do they're really getting this. And that's the kind of the fulfillment of seeing those light bulbs go off in students and know that this is going to be different than what they're learning or what they've learned up until this point.
Hey listeners, just a quick time out and we'll get right back to today's episode. The Sports Innovation Journal is currently accepting submissions. If you're seeking a place to publish your innovative ideas and research on the sport industry, then consider submitting your work to the Sports Innovation Journal. The Sports Innovation Journal is an open access journal targeting the practitioner seeking answers to the most common questions and problems in the industry. We're always looking for submissions from researchers who are identifying and studying those questions and problems. If you're interested in publishing your work in or serving as a reviewer for the Sports Innovation Journal, please visit the link in the notes or contact Dr. David Pierce, the editor of the SIJ, at dpierce3@iu.edu. That's DPIERCE3@iu.edu. Now, let's get back to today's episode of the Sports Innovation Podcast.
So, Bryan, you own your own agency, Right Hand, here in Indy. You can kind of see the class. I mean, you've had actually, I think, a couple of different roles and positions and jobs during the time that you've been doing this. Can you just kind of maybe speak to as an employer and a small business owner now of an agency, like what in an experience like a Capstone class, the way we kind of set it up, has value for students taking their next step, or even for you as an employer?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and especially the job market right now, and I'll speak to it kind of the immediacy, then maybe over the course of the time that I've been doing this, I think really what employers want, they want people to take ownership of their employer, like their roles within a company, right? Regardless of the title, they want people to own that. They don't want to be, they don't want to micromanage their employees because they're probably operating in a lean staff. They don't have time to oversee every little detail. So, something that I've really been helping students to understand is the more you can get used to taking ownership of your class project at Capstone, how much that's going to help you translate into your regular internship or your full-time job whenever you get those opportunities, because that's what an employer wants. They want people who almost think of it as like kind of an entrepreneur of their career, right? They're willing to take on. But I think the other thing that we really want to, as a co-teach, as we co-teach this, is inspire students to be just curious about their industry, about their different organizations, and that's a word that we try to use almost every class, about curiosity. And I think that those are the things that employers want people coming into their industry to be curious and ask questions, but then also go out and try to find answers to those, and being able to talk to people, be it at a trade show or at a networking event, to really be able to kind of have that curiosity. So I know that's really important. And then I think from a thing that I've had to learn professionally in sports is, everyone dreams of working for the NBA team in town or the NFL team or MLB team. But there's a lot of these organizations, smaller organizations, that you can really make your name in. And a lot of it is, as a student coming in or as intern, just really being curious about that really excites your employer, of just really wanting to see them continue to learn. And I often say that sometimes when you're with those smaller organizations, you have more opportunity to learn because there's less people working there. And so I just really try to get students to embrace this. Sports management, sports marketing, it's about entertainment. It's about, guest experiences. It's about, athlete experiences. This stuff is not meant to be, it's fun, and so you're trying to get that so students really embrace these opportunities, especially here in Indianapolis. I mean, the types of opportunities they have, they really need to embrace it. And understanding that from the very beginning in Capstone, I think, is a great way for them to jump into their career.
What advice would you have if people are listening to this and they want to pair up with a community partner and do a project in that vein? Do you have any advice for faculty working with industry?
A couple pieces. One, I think you've done a great job, and even before you and several people here at IUPUI, is getting off of campus, like physically meeting people where they're at. Ask for a meeting at a coffee shop or asking to go see their, wherever they're at. It does make a difference, right? Sometimes there's this push-pull between academia and industry, and I think by kind of just going out and making the opportunity or the effort to go out to meet people where they're at into the community is a big deal. The other thing too, and this is where you have gotten really good at, is asking about their day-to-day or their problems, and not that a student or a Capstone class is going to solve them, but that you are willing to go alongside them. Because a lot of these industry people, when they have a challenge for students, oftentimes they come at a very low expectation, right? It's, oh, what am I really going to get out of it from a student perspective? And so just tell them that you're going to go along with this as a true partner and not so much as solutions. This isn't a consultant group that you're going to come with these proven methodologies. It's a lot about just being curious about their business as well.
And we flip that on students and tell them all the time we would rather have them be experts on the problem than have the perfect solution they just copied and pasted from some Google search that they did that some other organization did 2 years ago that worked.
Well,
right?
and I think from the key learnings where we're working with an organization that had this industry knowledge internally, when students come in and try to tell them, here are all these solutions, a natural reaction for any operations team or team that's been entrenched for a long time. There is like, oh, well, you don't understand our business, so that would never work. And so really we've kind of focused more on understanding how to solve problems or the identifying the problems and really getting in depth versus just coming in what we, was these surface level solutions that industry is very quick to dispel, or it's like, well, of course the students say this is not really our business. So really helping students become those experts, I think has really allowed our partnerships to really grow.
What about, and I can speak to this too, but advice that you would have for maybe someone wanting to just try this out for the first time? I mean, we don't want things to feel overwhelming, right? So like what is some advice for some new instructors that kind of maybe their brain or their, the way they would like to kind of do things leans this direction in the classroom, but haven't had, the course assignment or the support, or they don't think they have the time to do it. What would your advice be for kind of that persona group, to use design thinking terms?
Well, and I do think we've done a lot of, I would say, outside work, both you and I, of just bouncing ideas off of each other. But I do think this kind of growth mindset, like having a growth mindset and coming in with the idea that you don't have to have everything perfect, right? Especially if you're a faculty who plans on being there for a long period of time, like know that one semester you're going to start in with an approach, you may have to tweak it. It's not so much that you have to have everything perfect all at once, and that you're going through this process as well as the students. And I think that just embracing that, and we say, embracing the mess, and sometimes that is very, very uncomfortable for all of us, right? Like for the student's perspective, but then also being so used to controlling your classroom and it's unnerving, right? And I know that first couple semesters we worked together, you were like, how are we going to get to this? And I was like, I don't know. And now we kind of laugh it off. But I think just embracing that, these projects, just like the world, is imperfect. And sometimes it's very nonlinear, and sometimes you just have to make it up as you, I wouldn't say make it up, but you're course correcting, you're changing as you go. And so that's just, you kind of got to go with it.
Yeah. So I think, for me, it would just be kind of just start where you're at, right? And in reality, like I would look at it as like a kind of a 3-year pathway to get it to exactly where you want to go. But really the curricular enhancement and the teaching innovation really happens during the reflection period. Mm-hmm. It's not the adoption of design thinking for us or any other sort of methodology, 7-step approach to whatever that's out there. It's really in your reflection and enhancement and improvement. And the good thing as a faculty member, I mean, those are all the things that you need to be, writing about in your promotion and tenure dossier and your faculty annual reviews. And so I just feel like that's one thing I've learned recently is like really, teaching innovation happens in those moments. It's not the adoption of whatever the teaching innovation isn't saying we used, a new AI technology to help us synthesize data.
And I would say too is like you don't have to be an expert in design thinking to start, right? Like get the basic understanding of it, knowing that your skill is going to get better, but you don't learn. I feel like it's not learning by just reading and observing. You really have to get your hands dirty and make some mistakes and learn from those and go back. And so I think starting is the most important thing with every kind of new venture.
And even within our kind of 8-year window of doing this, we kind of went through the first cycle and really feel like perfected it about the 5th semester when we had the sports officiating one, which ultimately resulted in some really good outcomes, right? I mean, best outcomes ever from the class. And then COVID hit the next semester. And then I don't know what any of us were doing during that, but that was frustrating and no one knew what they were doing. And then by the time we came out of COVID, it was like some of the things that had worked before, like they weren't working, students weren't connecting with it. And then, I remember in May of 2023, us meeting, I think in this room even, and just being this like completely flummoxed as to why students were not responding we're doing the same stuff just 3 years before, and it was just not landing. And we had kind of back-to-back semesters of projects. And then, really at that, the way I look at it is we kind of rethought the first 2 weeks of the class, really put the emphasis on curiosity, found the perfect TED Talk video where it challenged students to think with a what if mindset. So we had it's what we were trying to communicate with students, but I don't know why we had never said that, but like it was in this little 5-minute video. And I thought in the fall last year really just made all the difference right off the bat, just getting them to understand why innovation is important and why curiosity is important. And it was just like your good conversations, and it was just like we were often running from a better spot at the beginning. We just had kind of taken it for granted that students would think that that's important, but like they were not. So
and I think there's a couple other things that we learned too was, and you did a great job of starting to sprinkle design thinking, or at least the terms, earlier in their journey. So
let's talk about that.
The first time that, when we first started this, like the first time they were getting introduced to design thinking was at a capstone level, right? And not that we expected them to know it at a capstone, but they had never heard a lot of these terms or didn't know this. And so not only are we trying to get a project done, but we're also trying to teach them the essence of design thinking. So by you adjusting that, putting that into several classes before, they started to. And so when we were referring back to, well, what did you guys do in this class? Like, oh yeah, we didn't know that was called design thinking. Or we didn't see the application of it, and we're like, perfect.
So yeah, when students come on campus, they get to do a JAG start, using the right term, Sherm, JAG challenge. JAG, thank you. The JAG challenge, which is in their 1 week kind of summer bridge, like their first week on campus as freshmen. They participate in a how to make the food and dining service, better or whatever, how to make it more walkable on campus. Just easy things that all students can connect with. So they're exposed to some terminology. Dr. Sherman then puts it into the intro class a little bit, talks about some experience design there, then digs in a little further in the 300 level class where we really get into the methods and mindsets. And so he does it from a case study perspective. So we actually repackage our old capstone classes as kind of little mini case studies so that we can illustrate a journey map, a rose thorn bud exercise, affinity clustering. I've published some case studies in the Case Study Sport Management Journal where then it queues up 5 or 6 problem spaces and then they can go ideate. So we've repackaged our own stuff a little bit, and then now when they come into 432, into the capstone class that we teach, I mean, they're really locked and loaded, ready to go. We do have a curriculum that I wrote that kind of goes along with the class, but I lecture one time for about 75 minutes in the class, and that's it. I kind of do a kind of a design thinking 101 rehasher kind of a thing, and refresher, yeah. And then the rest of it is working on the project. So scaffolding and working with your other colleagues and finding those gaps in the curriculum. If you've got some other kind of model you want to use, like is there a colleague you can kind of work with so that they can introduce some concepts?
And I would also say this too, when we sit down and talk to industry people, they may not know the term design thinking, but when we talk to them about stakeholder research, we talk to them about being able to cluster or do a journey map. Like those are things that I think are pretty commonly accepted terms in the industry, regardless of the industry, where people are interested. And they're like, oh, well, we thought it was just you were going to regurgitate a bunch of solutions, right? And I think that's the initial appeal to it. But then as they start seeing that there's a lot more that goes into that, I think that's also what makes the partnership more attractive to them, because there's a greater understanding and they know that there's a lot more processes. There's a well thought out approach to the class, and not just like the 16 weeks magically we're going to come up with a bunch of solutions. I think they really do like that whole process, but they may not call it design thinking. It's a lot of stuff that industries now have stripped away different elements of design thinking, and then they don't really know that they're using design thinking, but they really are.
So we'll kind of wrap it up here, but we didn't talk about this beforehand, but do you have a favorite moment from the class? Was there like maybe a light bulb moment with a student, or just a certain pitch that was given, or like what do you have
I think there's favorite moments in the sense of when students, like I said, they stay after class even the sense of pride when we see them pitch to a community partner and they're just beaming of they actually did stuff. And I think those are exciting things. But then, when we were early on and we were using some tools that really were kind of outside of our expertise, and we were learning with students, and to see a student download a design project or a program and like teach themselves over a weekend how to actually create something, I think those have been the exciting thing. And then I think from a community partner, when they when we do a presentation and they just kind of thank us, and they're really
Surprised.
They're surprised, pleasantly surprised that the thought that's gone into it. Because I think, as I've always told students, ideas are kind of a dime a dozen. We don't need to spend 16 weeks to come up with ideas. Most of them would probably be bad. But really just seeing the whole process and then the community partner is really engaged in the process and really, exceed their expectation. I think those are the moments that are really excited. Then, you've seen students have gone on to work at startups and really kind of use this stuff.
Really actually use it in the next step.
And then you see, students who have used it into the operation side of things, where they're like, very much an operations. They would admit they're very detail oriented, but they've learned that through this design thinking process and stuff they learned at Capstone, how to ask better questions, how to look at, a fan experience when they come into a facility. So those are things, I guess, just hearing back how students have taken this and run with it is really exciting.
All right, Bryan, thanks for coming in today. Great chat. There's a lot of great resources on the Institute for Engaged Learning website at IU Indianapolis. We've got all 11. We've got taxonomies and advice and best practices on all 11 high-impact practices. So, a lot of thought leadership coming out of the IU Indianapolis campus in that space.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for letting me be a part of this program. And really, the school, I think, is, as I've always said about IU Indianapolis, it's a great resource for not only Central Indiana, but for the whole state. And I'm really proud we can work together.
You've been listening to the Sports Innovation Podcast presented by the IU Indianapolis Sports Innovation Institute. You can check out the research conducted by the SII, get more information on the Sports Innovation Journal, and check out the research conducted by some of our students, and much, much more by checking out all of our work at the SII blog at blogs.iu.edu/IUIndySII. Subscribe for the latest episodes, and thank you for listening to the Sports Innovation Podcast.